The sun cast long shadows over the dusty streets of Jackson, Wyoming in 1878, as Winifred Voss fought desperately against the rough hands dragging her toward the auction block. Her voice raw from screaming truths her father had forbidden her to speak. The crowd gathered in the town square parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and for some, shameful entertainment. This wasn't the first time Judge Hammond Voss had exercised his power in Jackson, but it was certainly the most scandalous auctioning off his own daughter for daring to expose his corruption. "Let me go," Winifred demanded, her blue eyes flashing with defiance despite the terror gripping her heart. At 22, she'd known challenging her father would bring consequences, but never had she imagined this barbaric punishment. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves around her face as she struggled. "You cannot do this." Judge Voss stood on the wooden platform, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her. "I can do whatever I please in this town," he announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying across the square. "My daughter has proven herself unruly and disobedient. Since I cannot control her, perhaps someone else can teach her the proper way a lady should behave." Winifred's offense had been simple yet, in her father's eyes, unforgivable. After discovering documents proving his involvement in stealing land from farmers on the outskirts of Jackson, she had attempted to bring this information to the town council. Her father had intercepted her, and now, rather than face the consequences of his actions, he was making a spectacle of her, a warning to anyone else who might consider standing against him. Sheriff Miller stood nearby, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene against the town's most powerful man. Several of the townspeople looked away, shame evident in their downcast eyes. Others watched with morbid fascination. This was Jackson in 1878, a place where justice often bent to the will of powerful men. "We'll start the bidding at $50, announced Bartholomew Reed, the town's auctioneer who looked distinctly uncomfortable with his current assignment but too afraid to refuse the judge. There was an uncomfortable silence as the crowd shifted nervously. Many knew this was wrong, but fear of the judge kept them quiet. A few rough-looking men from the saloon started bidding, their intentions clearly written in their leering expressions. $60, called out a gruff voice. $75, countered another. Winifred felt her heart sink with each increasing bid. Her dress was torn at the shoulder from her struggles, her wrists raw from the rope binding them. She scanned the crowd desperately, looking for a friendly face, for someone who might help her. It was then she noticed him, a tall figure at the edge of the crowd, watching with intense, narrowed eyes beneath the brim of his worn cowboy hat. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at her with pity or lecherous interest. There was something else in his gaze, calculation, perhaps, and a quiet anger. $100, came a drawling voice from a man she recognized as the owner of the brothel in the next town over. Her blood ran cold. $200, countered the cowboy suddenly, stepping forward. The crowd parted further as he approached, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. Winifred got her first clear look at him, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing green eyes. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were dusty from the trail, there was something commanding about his presence. He couldn't have been much older than 30. $200 for the judge's daughter, the man said clearly, his voice carrying a note of authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. "And I reckon that's where the bidding stops." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, and even the brothel owner backed down, muttering under his breath. The judge looked displeased but nodded to the auctioneer. "Sold," Reed announced hurriedly, "To Mr. Isaiah Weston," the cowboy supplied, reaching into his vest and pulling out a leather pouch. He counted out the money deliberately, laid it on the platform, then turned his gaze to Judge Voss. "I believe this concludes our business." Without waiting for a response, Isaiah approached Winifred. Up close, she could see the lines of his face, handsome but weathered by sun and wind, with a small scar above his right eyebrow. His expression remained unreadable as he took a knife from his belt and cut the ropes binding her wrists. Winifred flinched, uncertain of his intentions, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he freed her hands. The crowd watched in stunned silence. "Come with me, Miss Voss," Isaiah said quietly. It wasn't a request, but there was no cruelty in his tone. With no real choice, Winifred followed him through the parting crowd. She could feel her father's furious gaze boring into her back, but refused to give him the satisfaction of looking back. Instead, she held her head high despite her disheveled appearance and torn dress. Isaiah led her to where a magnificent black stallion was tied outside the general store. He untied the reins and, to her surprise, offered her his hand to help her mount. "I can ride behind you," Winifred said stiffly, trying to maintain what dignity she had left. "You've had enough indignity for one day," Isaiah replied simply. "Take the horse. I'll walk alongside." Reluctantly, she accepted his help and settled into the saddle. As they began moving through town, the whispers followed them, but Isaiah seemed impervious to the stares and comments. They had just reached the edge of town when he finally spoke again. "Now, Miss Voss," he said, looking up at her with those penetrating green eyes, "what exactly was it that you wanted to say that got you in so much trouble?" Winifred stared at him, stunned by the question. Not "where shall I take you?" or "what should I do with you?" but a question that acknowledged her voice, the very thing her father had tried to silence. "Why do you care what I have to say?" she asked cautiously, her voice hoarse from screaming earlier. "Because," Isaiah replied simply as they continued down the road leading away from Jackson. "I didn't pay $200 for a woman. I paid it to hear a truth someone was willing to be punished for telling." For the first time since this nightmare began, Winifred felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps this strange cowboy wasn't what he seemed. Perhaps he was something far more dangerous to men like her father, a person who would listen. "My father has been stealing land," she said finally, the words rushing out like water from a broken dam. "He's been forging documents, intimidating farmers, and taking their property. I found proof in his study letters, altered deeds. He's working with the railroad company. They're going to run tracks through Jackson, and he's been acquiring land along the proposed route to sell at a profit." Isaiah's expression darkened as he listened, but he didn't interrupt her. They continued down the road, putting distance between themselves and the town, and Winifred felt her courage growing with each step. The Hendersons lost their farm last month, a place that had been in their family for 2 generations. Mrs. Henderson died of pneumonia 2 weeks later. They're saying it was the illness, but I know it was heartbreak, and they aren't the only ones. Winifred's hands tightened on the reins. "I was going to bring the documents to the territorial governor, but Father caught me, and now—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "And now you're here," Isaiah finished for her, his eyes scanning the horizon thoughtfully. "Your father's a powerful man. He'll come looking for you." "Why did you buy me?" Winifred asked directly, needing to understand his motivation. "What do you want from me?" Isaiah stopped walking and looked up at her, his expression serious. "Miss Voss, I didn't buy you. No person can own another. That war ended 13 years ago. I paid to get you away from that auction block, and those men with less honorable intentions." "Then what do you expect in return?" Winifred pressed, skepticism evident in her voice. Life had taught her that men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "Nothing you don't willingly give," he answered firmly, "including the truth you just shared. My ranch is about 10 miles outside of Jackson. You can stay there while we figure out what to do about your father. I have a spare room and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, lives on the property. Your reputation will remain intact." Winifred studied him, trying to determine if she could trust this stranger who had just dramatically altered the course of her life. There was something in his direct gaze that inspired confidence, but caution held her back. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." A shadow passed over Isaiah's face. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for disliking corrupt officials who abuse their power, and I've never been one to stand by when I see an injustice." They continued their journey in silence, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves and Isaiah's boots on the dusty road the only sounds between them. Winifred's mind raced with questions, fears, and the faintest glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The sun was beginning to set, painting the vast Wyoming sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple when they crested a hill, and Isaiah's ranch came into view. It was larger than Winifred had expected: a sprawling property with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. A herd of cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke rose from the house's chimney. "Welcome to the Double W," Isaiah said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not fancy, but it's mine, free and clear." As they approached, an older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she squinted suspiciously at Winifred. "Mr. Weston," she called out, "I wasn't expecting you back with company." "Mrs. Abernathy," Isaiah nodded respectfully. "This is Miss Winifred Voss. She'll be staying with us for a while. Could you please prepare the guest room and perhaps find her some clothes?" The circumstances of her arrival were unexpected. The older woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in Winifred's disheveled appearance, but she asked no questions. "Of course. Come along, Miss Voss. You look like you could use a hot bath and a meal." Isaiah helped Winifred down from the horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment they stood face to face, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for what he had done. "Don't thank me yet," he replied quietly. "Your father won't let this go easily, but for tonight at least you're safe." Winifred followed Mrs. Abernathy into the house, aware that she was entering yet another unknown situation, but somehow this one felt less threatening. The house was surprisingly comfortable inside, clean, and well furnished with solid, handcrafted pieces. It spoke of care and permanence, not the temporary quarters of a drifting cowboy. Mrs. Abernathy led her to a bedroom on the second floor. "The bathroom's down the hall. I'll heat water for your bath and find you something to wear. Mr. Weston's sister left some clothes when she visited last summer. You look to be about her size." "Mr. Weston has a sister?" Winifred asked, surprised by this revelation of family. "Yes, Elizabeth. Lives in Denver now with her husband. Comes to visit once a year." Mrs. Abernathy studied Winifred carefully. "Mr. Weston is a good man, Miss Voss, one of the best I know. Whatever trouble you're in, you could have found yourself in far worse hands." With that cryptic comment, the housekeeper left Winifred alone. She moved to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of land surrounding the ranch. In the distance, she could see Isaiah leading his horse to the barn, his movements efficient and purposeful. For the first time since her father had discovered her with the documents, Winifred allowed herself to take a deep breath. She was not safe, not truly, but she had found an unexpected ally in this quiet cowboy with the penetrating gaze. What would come next, she couldn't say, but for the moment she was free from her father's immediate reach. And for now, that would have to be enough. The hot bath Mrs. Abernathy prepared was a luxury Winifred hadn't expected. She sank into the water, wincing as it touched the raw skin on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her. The events of the day replayed in her mind her father's rage when he'd caught her with the documents, the public humiliation of being dragged to the auction block, and then the appearance of Isaiah Weston, a man who had spent a small fortune to rescue a woman he didn't know. By the time she dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple blue cotton dress that fit well enough, and made her way downstairs, the aroma of cooking filled the house. She found Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, while Isaiah sat at the table examining some papers. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, Winifred caught an expression of something like appreciation in his eyes before his face returned to its usual composed state. He stood, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Mrs. Abernathy makes the best beef stew in the territory." The older woman snorted, but couldn't hide her pleased expression. "Flattery won't get you an extra helping, Mr. Weston." The domesticity of the scene was so at odds with the chaos of earlier that Winifred felt momentarily disoriented. She sat carefully, aware that her life had completely upended in the span of a single day. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Voss," Isaiah said as Mrs. Abernathy placed bowls of steaming stew before them. "Your father won't let this matter rest. He'll come looking for you, possibly as soon as tomorrow." "I know," Winifred replied, staring down at her food. "He can't afford to let me go to the territorial governor with what I know." "Do you still have the documents?" Isaiah asked, his voice low. Winifred shook her head regretfully. "He found them when he caught me, burned them right in front of me. But I remember what they said, and I know where to find more evidence. He's not as clever as he thinks he is." Mrs. Abernathy, who had been quietly listening while pretending not to, finally spoke up. "Judge Voss has never been a friend to this ranch. When Mr. Weston's father died and there was that dispute about the water rights." She trailed off, looking at Isaiah. "The judge ruled against me," Isaiah finished. "Said my father's claim to the creek that runs through our property wasn't properly documented. Would have ruined this place if I hadn't found my grandfather's original deed in an old trunk. The judge wasn't happy when I presented it." "So you have your own reasons for standing against my father," Winifred observed. "I have my reasons for recognizing a corrupt man when I see one," Isaiah corrected. "But my personal history with your father isn't why I stepped in today. No one deserves to be treated as property, especially not for speaking the truth." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Isaiah spoke again. "We need a plan. Your word against your father's won't be enough, especially with him being the judge." "I told you, I know where to find more evidence," Winifred insisted. "There's a safe in his study. The combination is my mother's birthday, the only sentimental thing about him. He keeps all his important papers there, including correspondence with the railroad executives." "So you're suggesting we break into the judge's house and rob his safe?" Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Not we," Winifred clarified. "Me, this is my fight." Isaiah shook his head firmly. "You're not going back there alone. If you're caught, there's no telling what he might do next time." "I can't ask you to risk yourself further for me," Winifred protested. "You've already done enough." Mrs. Abernathy made a disapproving sound. "Neither of you is breaking into anywhere. There are legal ways to handle this." "The law in Jackson is my father," Winifred reminded her bitterly. "And he's made it clear he'll use that power however he sees fit." Isaiah considered for a moment. "There's an alternative. I have a friend in Cheyenne, Samuel Cooper. He's a lawyer with connections to the territorial governor." If we can get word to him, explain the situation, he might be able to help." "And in the meantime?" Winifred asked. "My father won't stop looking for me." "In the meantime, you stay here where it's safe. My men are loyal, and Mrs. Abernathy can be trusted completely." He looked to the housekeeper, who nodded firmly. "Don't you worry, Miss Voss. No one will get to you while you're under this roof." After dinner, Isaiah excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Winifred with Mrs. Abernathy. The older woman showed her around the house, a tour that revealed Isaiah Weston was a man of simple but refined tastes. Books lined the shelves in his study, many on law and history. A piano stood in one corner of the sitting room, sheet music neatly stacked beside it. "Does Mr. Weston play?" Winifred asked, surprised. "His mother taught him," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "She was from Boston, educated and cultured. Met his father when he went east to sell cattle. Quite the scandal in her circles when she followed him back to Wyoming territory." Winifred ran her fingers lightly over the piano keys. "My mother taught me too, before she died." "I'm sorry for your loss," Mrs. Abernathy said gently. "It was 10 years ago, consumption." Winifred's voice was flat. "My father changed after that. Or perhaps he was always that way, and my mother's presence had tempered him. Either way, when she died, whatever warmth existed in our home died with her." Later, as Winifred prepared for bed, she heard the soft notes of the piano drifting up the stairs. Curious, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way down quietly. In the sitting room, Isaiah sat at the piano, his large hands moving with surprising grace over the keys. He was playing a melancholy tune she didn't recognize, his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. Winifred remained in the doorway, watching him. In this unguarded moment, she saw something vulnerable in the strong cowboy who had rescued her. The music spoke of loss and longing, emotions carefully concealed behind his composed exterior. She must have made some sound because Isaiah stopped playing suddenly, turning to find her in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he assured her, though he closed the piano lid. "I don't often have an audience." "You play beautifully," Winifred said, moving further into the room. "Mrs. Abernathy told me your mother taught you." A shadow crossed Isaiah's face. "She did. She loved music, said it was the one thing from her old life she couldn't leave behind." "You must miss her," Winifred said softly. "Every day." He gestured to the chair near the piano. "Please, sit if you'd like." Winifred settled into the chair, arranging the shawl around her shoulders. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did today. I still don't entirely understand why you did it, but I'm grateful nonetheless." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. "6 years ago," he finally said, "I saw a man hanged in Laramie. He was accused of stealing cattle, but the trial was a sham. The real reason he was hanged was that he had spoken out against powerful ranchers who were fencing off public land illegally. I knew he was innocent, had evidence that could have saved him, but I was young and afraid of those men. I said nothing." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I've regretted that silence every day since. So when you saw me today," Winifred began, "when I saw you today, I saw someone brave enough to speak the truth despite the consequences. I couldn't stand by again." He looked away, as if uncomfortable with revealing so much of himself. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Winifred nodded, rising from her chair. As she turned to leave, she hesitated, then looked back at him. "The tune you were playing, what was it?" A small, sad smile touched Isaiah's lips. "Something my mother composed. She called it Wyoming Sunset." "It's beautiful," Winifred said softly. "Perhaps someday you'll play the whole thing for me." Perhaps, he agreed, his eyes meeting hers in a way that made her heart quicken unexpectedly. "Good night, Miss Voss. Good night, Mr. Weston." As Winifred climbed the stairs back to her room, she found herself wondering about the complex man who had so suddenly entered her life. Isaiah Weston was not what she had initially assumed, just a cowboy with a sense of justice. There were depths to him that intrigued her, layers she found herself wanting to understand. Sleep came more easily than she expected that night, despite the turmoil of the day and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. For the first time in years, she felt that she wasn't facing her battles alone. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Winifred woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, the distant lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, men's voices calling to each other as they began their day's work. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her new surroundings before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in another borrowed dress, this one a practical brown cotton with small white flowers, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Abernathy was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, while Isaiah sat at the table with a cup of coffee, reading what appeared to be a letter. He looked up when she entered, nodding in greeting. "Good morning, Miss Voss. I trust you slept well." "Better than expected, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Abernathy offered her. "I've just received word from one of my men who went into town early this morning," Isaiah said, his expression serious. "Your father has gathered a search party. He's telling people you were abducted by a stranger with unknown intentions." Winifred's hand tightened around her cup. "He's trying to paint you as a villain." "It's a clever move," Isaiah acknowledged. "Makes anyone who might have helped us into potential accomplices to kidnapping. He's also offering a substantial reward for information leading to your return." "How long before they start searching the outlying ranches?" Winifred asked, her mind racing. "Not long, which is why we need to move quickly." Isaiah set down the letter. "I've sent a rider to Cheyenne with a message for Samuel Cooper, but it will take at least 4 days for him to receive it and respond." "So what do we do in the meantime?" Winifred asked. "We get you somewhere safer than this ranch," Isaiah replied. "I have a line cabin up in the mountains, about a day's ride from here. It's isolated, hard to find unless you know where to look. You'll be safer there until we hear from Samuel." Mrs. Abernathy made a disapproving noise. "You can't take a young lady to a remote cabin, Mr. Weston. It's not proper." "I'll be staying here," Isaiah clarified. "Mrs. Abernathy, I'd like you to accompany Miss Voss to the cabin. Pack enough provisions for a week just to be safe." The housekeeper nodded, clearly relieved. "When do we leave?" "As soon as possible. I'll have Jacob saddle horses for you both and prepare a pack mule for the supplies." "I can ride," Winifred assured him. "My mother insisted I learn, despite my father's objections that it wasn't ladylike." A ghost of a smile touched Isaiah's lips. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Winifred agreed softly. The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as they prepared for the journey. Winifred helped Mrs. Abernathy pack food and other necessities, while Isaiah consulted with his ranch hands. By mid-morning they were ready to depart. Isaiah walked them to the stable where 2 horses and a pack mule waited. "Jacob will accompany you to the cabin, then return here. The trail is marked but easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for." He handed Mrs. Abernathy a map he'd drawn. "Follow this exactly. Once you reach the cabin, stay there. Don't light fires during the day when smoke might be seen. There's a spring nearby for fresh water." As Mrs. Abernathy mounted her horse, Isaiah turned to Winifred, his expression grave. "I know this isn't ideal, but it's the safest option for now." "I understand," Winifred assured him, "and I appreciate everything you're doing. He helped her onto her horse, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Follow Mrs. Abernathy's lead. She knows these mountains better than most men." The older woman snorted at this. "Been traversing these parts since before you were born, Mr. Weston." Isaiah smiled at this, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small revolver, which he handed to Winifred. "You know how to use this." Winifred took the weapon, checking it with practiced ease that clearly surprised him. "My mother insisted on this too," she explained. "Said a woman alone needed to be able to defend herself." "Your mother was a wise woman indeed," Isaiah remarked, genuine admiration in his voice. With final instructions given, Winifred and Mrs. Abernathy set off, Jacob leading the way. As they rode away from the ranch, Winifred glanced back to see Isaiah watching them go, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun, and felt a strange reluctance to leave him behind. The journey to the line cabin took them through increasingly rugged terrain. They followed game trails and narrow passes that would be easy to miss without a guide. By late afternoon, the landscape had transformed from rolling plains to pine-covered mountains. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the scent of pine and wildflowers replacing the dusty aroma of the lowlands. Jacob proved to be a silent but capable guide, his weathered face showing little expression as he led them higher into the mountains. Mrs. Abernathy occasionally pointed out landmarks or plants of interest, but mostly they rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Winifred's mind kept returning to Isaiah, his unexpected kindness, the depth she'd glimpsed when he played the piano, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her defenses. It was disconcerting to feel such a connection to a man she'd known for barely a day, yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "He's a good man," Mrs. Abernathy said suddenly, as if reading Winifred's thoughts. "Been through more than his share of hardship, but it never made him hard or bitter, just more determined to do right." "What happened to his parents?" Winifred asked, curious about the man who had risked so much to help her. "His mother died when he was 16. Influenza. His father followed 5 years later. Heart gave out. Isaiah was just 21 when he inherited the ranch, with debts and disputes attached to it. Everyone expected him to sell up and move on." Mrs. Abernathy's voice held unmistakable pride. "Instead, he worked harder than any 3 men, paid off the debts, and turned the Double W into one of the most successful ranches in the territory." Winifred processed this information, finding her admiration for Isaiah growing. "And he never married." Mrs. Abernathy gave her a shrewd look. "There was a girl once, about 4 years ago. Rebecca Thornton, daughter of a banker from Cheyenne. Pretty enough, but more in love with the idea of being a rancher's wife than with Isaiah himself. When she realized the reality involved more hard work than romantic sunsets, she returned to Cheyenne." The older woman sniffed disapprovingly. "Isaiah doesn't talk about it, but I think it reinforced his tendency to keep to himself." They reached the line cabin as the sun was beginning to set. It was small but sturdy, built of thick logs with a stone chimney. Inside was a single room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, and basic furnishings. Simple, but comfortable enough. Jacob helped them unload the supplies and settled the horses in a small corral hidden among the trees. After ensuring they had everything they needed, he prepared to leave. "Mr. Weston said to tell you he'll send word as soon as he hears from Mr. Cooper," Jacob told Winifred, "and to stay put, no matter what." After Jacob departed, Mrs. Abernathy set about making the cabin livable while Winifred unpacked their provisions. They worked in comfortable silence until the older woman spoke. "You know, your situation reminds me of something that happened years ago." Mrs. Abernathy said as she swept the wooden floor. A woman in a nearby town spoke out against her husband's business practices. He was watering down the whiskey at his saloon and cheating miners out of their hard-earned money. He had her committed to an asylum, claimed she was hysterical and delusional. Winifred paused in her work. What happened to her? Her brother rescued her, took her all the way to California. Last I heard, she was running a successful millinery shop in San Francisco. Mrs. Abernathy set down her broom. My point is, sometimes the path to justice isn't straight or simple. And sometimes the people who help us along the way become more important than the destination. Winifred considered the older woman's words as they prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. The cabin grew cozy as night fell, with a small fire in the stove providing warmth and light. Outside, the mountain darkness was absolute, broken only by the brilliant stars overhead. "You think you'll be able to help me?" Winifred asked quietly as they sat at the small table. "Isaiah, I mean." Mrs. Abernathy studied her for a moment. "That man has never failed at anything he's set his mind to," she said confidently. "And I've never seen him more determined than he is to help you." The next few days passed slowly in the mountain cabin. Winifred and Mrs. Abernathy fell into a routine preparing meals, keeping the cabin tidy, taking short walks in the surrounding forest while being careful to remain hidden from any potential searchers. Mrs. Abernathy taught Winifred how to identify edible plants and berries, skills she had learned from her Shoshone grandmother decades earlier. They saw no sign of pursuit, but Winifred couldn't shake the feeling that her father wouldn't give up easily. Each night, she checked that Isaiah's revolver was loaded and within reach, a precaution that Mrs. Abernathy didn't discourage. On the fourth day, as they were hanging laundry on a line strung between two pines, Mrs. Abernathy suddenly stilled, her head cocked to one side. "Someone's coming," she said quietly. "Get inside and get the gun." Winifred hurried into the cabin, her heart pounding as she retrieved the revolver. Through the small window, she watched as Mrs. Abernathy calmly continued hanging clothes, though her posture was alert, ready. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and then a horse and rider appeared through the trees. Winifred's grip tightened on the gun until she recognized the rider Isaiah. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern. He wasn't supposed to come to the cabin himself. He was going to send a message with one of his men. She rushed outside as Isaiah dismounted, noting immediately that he looked tired, with several days' worth of beard growth and dust covering his clothes. "Mr. Weston," Mrs. Abernathy greeted him, her own relief evident. "We weren't expecting you personally." "There's been a change of plans," Isaiah said, his voice grave as his eyes found Winifred. "Your father's men searched the ranch yesterday. They didn't find anything connecting you to us, but they're expanding their search. It's not safe for you to stay here any longer." "Did you hear from Mr. Cooper?" Winifred asked anxiously. Isaiah nodded, leading his horse toward the cabin. "He's arranged for us to meet him in Laramie. From there, he'll escort you to Cheyenne where you can speak directly with the territorial governor." "Us?" Winifred questioned. "I'm coming with you," Isaiah confirmed. "Your testimony alone might not be enough, but combined with what I know about your father's previous abuses of power, it might convince the governor to act." "When do we leave?" Mrs. Abernathy asked practically. "Tonight," Isaiah replied. "We'll travel under cover of darkness for the first leg of the journey. It's a risk, but less of one than staying put. Your father has hired professional trackers." The urgency in his voice spurred them to action. While Mrs. Abernathy packed their few belongings, Isaiah and Winifred gathered the remaining provisions. "I'm sorry to put you in this position," Winifred said quietly as they worked. You've already risked so much for me." Isaiah paused, turning to face her directly. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your father is the one who should be sorry for betraying his position, for harming those he was meant to protect, and most of all, for treating his own daughter as property to be sold." The intensity in his gaze made Winifred's breath catch. In that moment, standing in the small cabin with the afternoon light filtering through the windows, she felt something shift between them, a recognition of something deeper than the circumstances that had brought them together. Before she could respond, Mrs. Abernathy returned with their packed bags, breaking the moment. "We're ready whenever you are," the older woman announced. Isaiah nodded, turning away from Winifred. "Good. We'll leave at dusk." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing for the journey. Isaiah explained the route they would take, avoiding the main roads and towns where news of the search for Winifred might have spread. They would travel southeast through the mountains, then cut across to Laramie, where Samuel Cooper would be waiting. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, they mounted their horses. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on returning to the ranch to maintain appearances and throw off any suspicion, leaving Winifred and Isaiah to make the journey alone. "Be careful, both of you," the older woman said as she prepared to head in the opposite direction. "And Miss Voss," she added with a meaningful look, "remember what I told you about paths that aren't straight or simple." With those cryptic words, she turned her horse and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Winifred and Isaiah to begin their journey to Laramie. The first few hours of riding were silent, both of them focused on navigating the unfamiliar mountain trails in the dark. Isaiah led the way, occasionally reaching back to guide Winifred's horse through particularly treacherous sections. Each time his hand touched hers, even briefly, Winifred felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with their precarious situation. They stopped to rest the horses shortly after midnight in a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. The night was clear and cool, the sky ablaze with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Isaiah built a small, carefully contained fire and prepared coffee in a battered tin pot. "We'll rest here for a couple of hours," he said, handing Winifred a cup of the strong black coffee. "Then ride until dawn. There's a place I know where we can hide during daylight hours." Winifred accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "How far is Laramie from here?" 3 days' ride if we're careful," Isaiah replied, settling across from her at the fire. "Cooper will wait." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the soft crackling of the fire and distant call of an owl the only sounds. "Tell me about your mother," Isaiah said suddenly, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he watched her over the rim of his cup. Winifred was surprised by the question but found herself wanting to answer. She was different from most women in Jackson. She'd been educated in Boston literature, music, even some science. She married my father when she was 18 and he was 35, already established as a lawyer. I think she believed she was entering a partnership of minds. A sad smile touched Winifred's lips. Instead, she found herself in Wyoming territory with a husband who expected obedience, not conversation. "Yet she taught you to ride and shoot," Isaiah observed. "She did those things in secret. She said she wanted me to be self-sufficient, to never have to depend entirely on any man." Winifred stared into the fire, memories washing over her. "When I was 12, she started coughing up blood. By the time I turned 13, she was gone. My father sent me to a finishing school in Denver the very next month." "He was trying to erase her influence," Isaiah surmised. Winifred nodded. "Yes, but it was too late. She'd already shaped who I would become." She looked up at him curiously. "And your mother?" Mrs. Abernathy said she was from Boston as well, A ghost of a smile touched Isaiah's lips. She was Catherine Weston, née Blackwell, daughter of a shipping magnate, educated at the finest schools. She scandalized Boston society by falling in love with a rough cattleman from Wyoming Territory. How did they meet? My father went east to secure contracts for his beef. They met at some society function where he was decidedly out of place. She said later it was his honesty that attracted her, how direct he was compared to the polished, calculating men she'd known all her life. Winifred could see the resemblance between father and son in that description. Isaiah possessed that same direct quality, a straightforwardness that was refreshing after the manipulations and deceptions she'd grown accustomed to in her father's house. They were happy together, Isaiah continued, his voice softening with memory. Even though ranch life was harder than anything she'd known before, she never complained, never regretted her choice. She brought music and books and ideas to our home, and my father treasured her for it. You were lucky to have them both, Winifred said quietly. I was, Isaiah agreed. They taught me what a true partnership looks like, two people respecting each other's strengths, supporting each other through hardships. He met her gaze directly. That's why what your father did trying to sell you like property struck me as so wrong. No one deserves to be owned or silenced, especially not by someone who should protect them. The intensity in his voice made Winifred's heart quicken. She was unaccustomed to being treated as an equal, to having her thoughts and feelings validated so completely. We should try to get some rest, Isaiah said eventually, banking the fire. We still have a long journey ahead. They spread their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying fire. Winifred lay awake for a long time, watching the stars through the gap in the pines overhead, acutely aware of Isaiah's presence just a few feet away. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly seen and heard. It was a heady feeling, dangerous perhaps, but undeniably powerful. She finally drifted into sleep, with the comforting sound of Isaiah's steady breathing nearby and the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. They rode hard for the next 2 days, avoiding main trails and settlements. Isaiah proved to be an expert guide, navigating through terrain that seemed impassable to Winifred's untrained eye. They traveled primarily at night, resting during daylight hours in hidden locations, a cave tucked behind a waterfall, an abandoned hunter's camp deep in the forest. Throughout the journey, they talked. Conversations that started hesitantly grew more comfortable as they shared stories of their lives. Isaiah told her about his struggles to save the ranch after his father's death, about his sister Elizabeth, who had married a lawyer in Denver, about his dreams of expanding the W. Winifred shared memories of her mother, her time at finishing school in Denver, and her growing awareness of her father's corruption after her return to Jackson. By the time they made camp on the second night, something had changed between them. The careful distance Isaiah had maintained initially had given way to something warmer, more personal. His gaze lingered on her face when she spoke. His hand remained on hers a moment longer than necessary when he helped her from her horse. They made camp in a small canyon, sheltered by high rock walls that would hide the light of their fire. The night was colder than previous ones, with a sharp wind that hinted at the approaching fall. We should reach Laramie by tomorrow evening, Isaiah said as he prepared their simple meal of beans and jerky. Cooper will be staying at the Overland Hotel under an assumed name. And then, Winifred asked, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then we present everything we know to the territorial governor. Isaiah handed her a tin plate of food. With Cooper's legal expertise and connections, there's a good chance he'll take action against your father. Winifred accepted the plate, her fingers brushing his. And after that? What happens to me? The question hung in the air between them. In their discussions of strategy and justice, they had carefully avoided talking about what would come after, where Winifred would go, what she would do if they succeeded in exposing her father. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "What do you want to happen?" he finally asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Winifred admitted. "I can't go back to Jackson, not after this, but I don't have family elsewhere, no money of my own." "You could go to Denver," Isaiah suggested. "My sister would welcome you. You could make a fresh start there." "Perhaps," Winifred said non-committally, though the idea of being sent away to start over among strangers left her cold. Over the past days, she had grown accustomed to Isaiah's presence, to the quiet understanding between them. The thought of leaving him behind caused an ache she hadn't anticipated. They ate in silence, the crackling fire and distant cry of coyotes the only sounds. When they finished, Isaiah took their plates to the small stream nearby to rinse them, returning to find Winifred standing at the edge of their camp, looking up at the star-filled sky. "My mother used to say the stars were different in Wyoming," she said without turning. "Brighter, somehow, closer. When I was away at school in Denver, I missed them." Isaiah moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "My mother said something similar. She called the night sky here heaven's window, said it made her feel small in the best possible way." Winifred glanced at him, struck by the profile of his face in the starlight, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Isaiah agreed. "You would have liked her, and she would have admired your courage." "I don't feel particularly courageous," Winifred confessed. "Most of the time I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear," Isaiah said quietly. "It's acting despite it." He turned to face her fully. "What you're doing, standing up against your father, risking everything for justice, that takes real courage." "I couldn't have done it without your help," Winifred said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaiah's eyes held hers in the darkness. "You would have found a way." "You're stronger than you know, Winifred." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about hearing it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air. "Isaiah," she responded in kind, testing the feel of his name on her lips. He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to step away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "We should get some rest," he said, though he made no move to step back. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Winifred nodded, unable to look away from his gaze. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, hoped he would, but instead he dropped his hand and stepped back. "Good night, Winifred," he said softly, returning to the fire. "Good night," she replied, remaining where she was for a few moments longer, trying to calm her racing heart before following him back to camp. They rode out before dawn, pushing their horses harder as they drew closer to Laramie. The terrain gradually changed from forested mountains to rolling hills, making them more visible but also allowing them to travel faster. Isaiah remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for any sign of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Laramie in the distance, a growing town nestled along the railroad tracks, with buildings clustered around a main street and smoke rising from various chimneys. "We'll approach from the north," Isaiah decided after studying the layout. "Less chance of being noticed that way." As they rode closer to town, Winifred felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. If all went according to plan, she would finally have the opportunity to expose her father's corruption. Yet there was also the unspoken question of what would happen afterward, where she would go, whether she would see Isaiah again. They entered Laramie as dusk was falling, when the streets were busy with workers returning home and visitors heading to saloons and restaurants. Isaiah led them to a small stable on the outskirts of town where an older man greeted him by name. "Mr. Weston, been a while since we've seen you in these parts." "Good to see you, Frank," Isaiah replied, dismounting and helping Winifred down from her horse. "We need boarding for the horses and discretion about our arrival." The stable owner looked curiously at Winifred but asked no questions. "You know your business is always private here. The horses will be well cared for." After settling their mounts, Isaiah and Winifred made their way through side streets toward the Overland Hotel, a 3-story building on the main street. They entered through a side door, avoiding the busy lobby, and Isaiah approached a hotel employee who was sweeping the hallway. "I'm looking for Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, using the agreed-upon alias for Samuel Cooper. The young man nodded. "Room 212, sir. He's expecting you." They climbed the stairs to the second floor and found room 212 at the end of the hallway. Isaiah knocked in a specific pattern 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened to reveal a distinguished-looking man in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He ushered them in quickly, checking the hallway before closing and locking the door. "Isaiah," he greeted, clasping the cowboy's hand firmly. "Glad you made it safely." His gaze shifted to Winifred. "And this must be Miss Voss." "Mr. Cooper," Winifred acknowledged, accepting his handshake. "Thank you for your help. Please call me Samuel, and there's no need for thanks. Any enemy of Judge Voss is a friend of mine." He gestured to the sitting area of the suite. "Please sit. You must be exhausted from your journey." The room was comfortably appointed with a small sofa, 2 armchairs, and a writing desk. A doorway led to what Winifred assumed was a bedroom. Tea and sandwiches had been arranged on a small table. "Help yourselves," Samuel urged. "We have much to discuss, and you'll need your strength." As they ate, Samuel outlined what he had learned. "The territorial governor is very interested in your testimony, Miss Voss. There have been rumors about your father's corruption for years, but no one with first-hand knowledge has been willing to come forward. With your statement and the corroborating evidence Isaiah has provided about previous cases, the governor is prepared to launch a formal investigation." "My father won't surrender his position easily," Winifred warned. "He has connections throughout the territory." "Which is precisely why the governor wants to move quickly," Samuel explained. "He's in Cheyenne now preparing the necessary papers. We're to meet him there the day after tomorrow." "What about the search for Winifred?" Isaiah asked. "Her father has hired trackers and is offering a substantial reward for her return." Samuel's expression grew serious. "That's complicating matters. There are wanted posters in every town between here and Cheyenne, describing Miss Voss as having been abducted by an unknown cowboy." He glanced at Isaiah. "The description is vague enough that it might not be connected to you specifically, but it's a concern. Then we need to be careful about how we travel to Cheyenne," Isaiah concluded. "Indeed, I've arranged for a private rail car on tomorrow's afternoon train. The governor has authorized it, and the railroad company has been discreetly cooperative." Samuel turned to Winifred. "In the meantime, Miss Voss, it would be best if you remained here in the hotel. I've taken the liberty of arranging a separate room for you, adjoining mine." "And me?" Isaiah asked. "There's a room across the hall," Samuel replied. "I thought it best we not all stay too close together, in case someone is watching the hotel." They discussed the details of their plan for the next day, with Samuel providing new clothes for both Winifred and Isaiah to help them blend in with the other passengers. "The train leaves at 2 o'clock, Samuel said as they concluded their discussion. "I suggest we all get some rest." It's been a long journey for you both, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges." He showed Winifred to her room, which was connected to his suite by a door that could be locked from either side. "For safety," he explained. "If there's any trouble, you can come through to my room or exit through the hallway." After ensuring she had everything she needed, Samuel left her alone, returning to his suite where Isaiah remained. Winifred could hear the low murmur of their voices through the door as they continued their discussion. The room was the most comfortable place she had slept in days, a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with hot water, even a small sitting area by the window overlooking the street below. Yet as she prepared for bed, Winifred found herself missing the simplicity of the camp she had shared with Isaiah, the intimacy of their conversations by the fire. She washed the trail dust from her face and changed into the nightgown Samuel had provided, then sat by the window watching the activity on the street below. Laramie was still busy even at this late hour, with saloons doing brisk business and occasional horsemen passing by. A soft knock at the connecting door startled her. "Yes," she called cautiously. "It's Isaiah," came the response. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Winifred grabbed a shawl to wrap around her shoulders, then unlocked the door. Isaiah stood in the doorway, looking cleaner but no less tired than before. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said, his eyes taking in the room. "And to tell you that Samuel and I will take turns keeping watch tonight, just as a precaution." "Do you think my father's men might have followed us here?" Winifred asked, worry creeping into her voice. "It's unlikely, but it's better to be cautious." Isaiah's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be easier than the past few days, but we're not safe yet." Winifred nodded, then hesitated. "Isaiah, thank you for everything. I know the risk you've taken, what you've sacrificed to help me." "I'd do it again," he said simply, his eyes holding hers, without hesitation. There was so much more she wanted to say about her growing feelings for him, about what might happen after Cheyenne, about the future she was beginning to imagine that included him. But the words wouldn't come, caught in her throat by uncertainty and the newness of these emotions. "Good night, Winifred," Isaiah said softly, seeming to understand her unspoken thoughts. "Sleep well." "Good night," she replied, watching as he stepped back and closed the door gently between them. Winifred slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with images of her father's angry face, of running through endless forests, of Isaiah reaching for her but always remaining just out of reach. She woke early, the gray light of dawn just beginning to filter through the window curtains. After dressing in the new clothes, Samuel had provided a simple but elegant green traveling dress. She waited for a knock at either door, using the time to gather her thoughts and prepare herself for the day ahead. It would be a relief to finally tell her story to someone with the authority to act against her father, but the prospect was also daunting. Around 8 o'clock, a soft knock came at the connecting door. It was Samuel, looking fresh and professional in a well-cut suit. "Good morning, Miss Voss," he greeted her cheerfully. "I've ordered breakfast to be sent up. I thought we might review your testimony while we eat." "Of course," Winifred agreed, following him into his suite. "Where is Isaiah?" "He went to check on the horses and make sure our departure from the hotel will go smoothly," Samuel explained, gesturing for her to take a seat at the small table where breakfast had been arranged. "He should be back shortly." Over eggs, toast, and coffee, Samuel asked Winifred detailed questions about her father's corruption, names, dates, specific incidents she could recall. He took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "This is very good, Miss Voss," he said encouragingly. "With your testimony and the supporting evidence, I believe the governor will have no choice but to remove your father from office and possibly pursue criminal charges. And what happens to me after that? Winifred asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. Samuel considered her thoughtfully. That depends on what you want. You're a young woman of intelligence and courage. Many paths could be open to you. Before Winifred could respond, there was a sharp knock at the hallway door. Samuel rose to answer it, checking through the peephole before opening the door to admit Isaiah. Winifred's heart quickened at the sight of him. Clean-shaven now and dressed in new clothes that transformed him from a rough cowboy to a respectable rancher. The new attire didn't diminish his presence. If anything, it emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the intensity of his green eyes. "Everything is arranged," Isaiah reported, nodding a greeting to Winifred. "The horses are being well cared for, and I've secured a carriage to take us to the station later." "Excellent," Samuel approved. "We were just reviewing Miss Voss's testimony. Would you care to join us for breakfast?" Isaiah accepted, taking the seat across from Winifred. As Samuel continued his questioning, Winifred found herself increasingly aware of Isaiah's steady gaze, the way he listened intently to her responses, occasionally adding his own recollections of previous cases where Judge Voss's rulings had seemed suspect. By mid-morning, Samuel was satisfied with their preparation. "I believe we have everything we need," he concluded, gathering his notes. "The train leaves at 2 o'clock, so we have a few hours to wait. I suggest you both rest. I need to send a telegram to the governor confirming our arrival." After Samuel departed, Isaiah and Winifred found themselves alone in the suite. A slightly awkward silence fell between them, different from the comfortable quiet they had shared during their journey. "You look well," Isaiah finally said. "The new clothes suit you." "As do yours," Winifred replied, a small smile touching her lips, "though I must admit I've grown accustomed to the dusty cowboy." Isaiah laughed softly, the sound warming her. "Don't worry, I'll be back to that soon enough. The double W doesn't run itself." The mention of his ranch brought the unspoken question back to the forefront of Winifred's mind: what would happen after Cheyenne? Would they go their separate ways? The thought sent a pang through her heart that surprised her with its intensity. "Isaiah," she began hesitantly, "when this is over, when my father has been dealt with, what then?" He met her gaze directly, his expression serious. "What do you want to happen, Winifred?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't allowed myself to think beyond exposing my father's corruption. But I know I don't want to lose." She hesitated, uncertain how to express what had grown between them. "Lose what?" Isaiah prompted gently, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. "This," Winifred gestured between them. "Whatever this is becoming." Isaiah took her hand, his larger one enveloping hers with gentle strength. "I don't want to lose it either," he said quietly. "These past days with you, despite the danger and uncertainty, have been—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Illuminating." "I've been alone for a long time, Winifred. I thought that was how I preferred it until I met you." Hope bloomed in Winifred's chest at his words. "What are you saying, Isaiah?" "I'm saying that when this is over, when you're safe and your father has been brought to justice, I hope you'll consider coming back to the Double W, not as someone in hiding, but because you want to be there." His green eyes held her steadily. "Because I want you there." Winifred's heart raced at his words, at the future they suggested. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." Isaiah's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a moment Winifred thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and stood. "We should be ready when Samuel returns," he said, though the look in his eyes told her this conversation wasn't over, merely postponed. Samuel returned shortly before noon, looking troubled. "There's a complication," he announced without preamble. Judge Voss arrived in Laramie this morning. Winifred felt the blood drain from her face. He's here. In Laramie, Samuel nodded grimly, with several men. They're asking questions at the hotels and stables. It won't be long before they reach the overland. How did he know to look here? Isaiah asked, his expression darkening. He may not know specifically, Samuel reasoned. He could be checking all the major towns within riding distance of Jackson, but it means we need to change our plans. We can't wait for the 2 o'clock train. What do you suggest? Isaiah asked, already moving to gather their few belongings. There's a freight train leaving for Cheyenne in 45 minutes. It's not as comfortable as the passenger train, but it will get us there. Samuel checked his pocket watch. We need to leave now, and we'll need to be cautious. I caught a glimpse of one of the men with Judge Voss, a particularly unsavory-looking character with a scar across his cheek. Martin Reeves. Winifred identified the man immediately, her voice tight with fear. My father's enforcer. He's dangerous, Samuel. All the more reason to leave quickly, Samuel concluded. I've arranged for a carriage to wait at the back entrance of the hotel. We'll go separately to avoid drawing attention. Miss Voss and I will go first, then Isaiah will follow a few minutes later. We'll meet at the freight depot on the east side of town. They moved swiftly, gathering only what was essential. Samuel gave Winifred a hooded cloak to help conceal her identity, and Isaiah checked that his revolver was loaded and accessible. Be careful, Isaiah told Winifred as she prepared to leave with Samuel. If anything happens, run, don't wait for us. I'm not leaving without you, she replied firmly. Isaiah's expression softened momentarily. Stubborn woman, he murmured, his tone making it sound like an endearment. Go now. I'll be right behind you. Samuel led Winifred down the back stairs of the hotel and out into the alley where a covered carriage waited. They settled inside, and the driver set off immediately, taking a circuitous route through the back streets of Laramie toward the freight depot. Will Isaiah be safe? Winifred asked anxiously, peering through the carriage curtain at the passing streets. He can take care of himself, Samuel assured her, though his own expression was concerned. Isaiah Weston isn't a man many would challenge willingly. They reached the freight depot without incident and were directed to a small office where the station master greeted Samuel with recognition. Mr. Cooper. The man nodded respectfully. Everything is arranged as requested. The private car is attached at the rear of the train. Thank you, Jenkins, Samuel replied. We'll board immediately. One more member of our party will be arriving shortly. The private car turned out to be a converted caboose, sparsely furnished but serviceable. Winifred paced anxiously by the window, watching for any sign of Isaiah. The minutes ticked by, and Samuel checked his pocket watch with increasing frequency. The train leaves in 10 minutes, he noted worriedly. He should have been here by now. Just as Winifred was about to suggest they go look for him, the door to the caboose opened and Isaiah entered, slightly out of breath but unharmed. Sorry for the delay, he apologized. I had to take a detour. Reeves was questioning people outside the hotel. Did he see you? Samuel asked sharply. No, but it was close. I don't think we've been discovered yet, but it's only a matter of time. Isaiah moved to the window, checking the platform. When does the train leave? Any minute now, Samuel replied. As if on cue, the train whistle sounded, and there was a lurch as the cars began to move. The three of them stood tensely by the windows, watching as the depot slowly receded from view. They were just beginning to relax when Winifred gasped, pointing to a figure running alongside the slowly accelerating train. It's Reeves, she exclaimed, recognizing the scarred face of her father's enforcer. The man was shouting something to companions behind him, pointing at their car. He must have spotted us, Isaiah said grimly, checking his revolver. Or someone at the depot told him about the private arrangement. They watched in alarm as Reeves managed to grab onto the ladder of the last car and pull himself aboard. Behind him, 2 more men were attempting to do the same. "Lock the door," Isaiah instructed sharply. "Move away from the windows." Samuel complied, securing the heavy door that connected their caboose to the rest of the train. "There's only the one entrance," he noted. "If they come through there, we have nowhere to go." "Then we'll have to make sure they don't get through," Isaiah replied, his voice hard as he positioned himself near the door, gun ready. Winifred's heart pounded in her chest as she heard the sound of men moving on the roof of the caboose. They were trapped, the train now moving too fast for them to jump safely. "What do they want?" Samuel asked tensely. "Surely they don't mean to harm a judge's daughter." "They want to stop me from testifying," Winifred replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father would rather see me silenced permanently than face the consequences of his actions." A heavy thud on the roof confirmed her fears. Reeves and his men were directly above them now. "They'll try to come through the roof hatch," Isaiah realized, glancing up at the small trapdoor that provided access to the roof of the caboose. "Samuel, is there anything we can use to barricade it?" Before Samuel could respond, there was a loud bang as something heavy struck the hatch. The wood splintered but held. "Get behind the desk," Isaiah ordered Winifred, positioning himself where he could see both the main door and the roof hatch. Another bang, and this time the wood cracked visibly. One more hit would likely break it open. "Samuel," Isaiah said quietly, "take my spare gun. If they get through, protect Winifred at all costs." The lawyer nodded grimly, accepting the smaller revolver Isaiah handed him. The final blow came with a crash of splintering wood. The hatch gave way, and a man's face appeared in the opening, not Reeves, but one of his companions. Isaiah didn't hesitate. He fired once, the shot deafeningly loud in the confined space. The man cried out and disappeared from view. "Did you kill him?" Winifred asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Wounded his shoulder," Isaiah replied, not taking his eyes from the opening. "He won't be climbing down anytime soon." There was movement on the roof, shouted curses, and then a new face appeared, Martin Reeves himself, his scarred visage contorted with rage. "Give us the girl, Weston," he called down. "This doesn't concern you." "You're not taking her anywhere," Isaiah replied coldly. "Leave now, or the next shot won't be a warning." Reeves laughed, an ugly sound. "You think you can stop us? The judge wants his daughter back, and what the judge wants, he gets." His gaze shifted to where Winifred stood behind the desk. "Come quietly, Miss Voss, and maybe your friends here don't have to die." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Winifred replied firmly. "And if my father wants me back, he can face me in Cheyenne before the territorial governor." Reeves's expression darkened. "Have it your way." He disappeared from the opening, and for a moment, there was silence save for the rhythmic clacking of the train wheels. Then, without warning, a small object was tossed through the hatch, landing with a clatter on the caboose floor. "Get down," Isaiah shouted, recognizing the threat an instant before the flash bang exploded in a deafening roar and blinding light. Disoriented and temporarily blinded, Winifred felt rather than saw someone drop through the hatch. There were sounds of struggle, a grunt of pain, another shot fired. As her vision began to clear, she saw Isaiah grappling with Reeves, while Samuel was engaged with the second man who had followed through the hatch. Isaiah was a skilled fighter, but Reeves was vicious and experienced. They crashed against the wall of the caboose, trading blows. When Reeves pulled a knife from his boot, Winifred didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and struck him hard across the back of the head. Reeves staggered, momentarily stunned, giving Isaiah the opening he needed. With a powerful blow, he knocked Reeves unconscious, the man crumpling to the floor. Turning to help Samuel, they found the lawyer had managed to subdue the second man with a well-placed shot to the leg. "Are you hurt?" Isaiah asked Winifred urgently, his hands gentle as they cupped her face, checking for injuries. "No," she assured him, though her ears were still ringing from the explosion. "Are you?" Isaiah's lip was split, and a bruise was forming under his right eye, but he shook his head. "Nothing serious." Samuel, the lawyer, was breathing heavily but appeared uninjured. "I'm fine, but we need to secure these men before they come around." Using belts and neckties, they bound the two unconscious men. The third remained on the roof, his wounded shoulder presumably preventing him from joining the fight. "What do we do with them?" Winifred asked, eyeing Reeves warily. Even unconscious, the man's scarred face held a threatening quality. "The next stop is about an hour from now," Samuel said, consulting his pocket watch. "We'll hand them over to the local sheriff with an explanation of what happened. I have enough influence to ensure they're held until the governor can interview them." As the adrenaline of the fight began to fade, Winifred found herself trembling. Isaiah noticed immediately, guiding her to sit on the small bench along one wall of the caboose. "It's over now," he said softly, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. "You're safe." "For how long?" Winifred asked, the reality of their situation sinking in. "My father won't stop. Even if these men are arrested, he'll send others. He can't afford to let me testify." "Then we make sure you testify as soon as we reach Cheyenne," Samuel said firmly. "The governor has agreed to meet us immediately upon our arrival. Once your statement is on record, your father's position becomes much more precarious." Isaiah's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Winifred's hand, a small gesture of comfort that helped steady her. "We'll get through this," he promised. "All of it." The rest of the journey passed without further incident. At the next stop, a small town called Rock Creek, they handed Reeves and his companion over to the local sheriff, along with Samuel's explanation of the situation. The third man had apparently jumped from the train at some point, his fate unknown. By the time they reached Cheyenne late that evening, word had been sent ahead to the governor, and a carriage was waiting to take them directly to the territorial offices. Despite the late hour, Governor John Thayer received them immediately in his private office, a distinguished man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Miss Voss," he greeted Winifred with a formal bow. "I understand you have a grave matter to bring to my attention concerning your father, Judge Hammond Voss." "Yes, sir," Winifred replied, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this long-awaited opportunity. "I have evidence of my father's corruption and abuse of power." For the next 2 hours, Winifred detailed everything she knew about her father's illicit activities, the land seizures, the collaboration with the railroad, the bribes he had accepted, the threats he had made. Isaiah and Samuel added their own testimonies, providing corroborating evidence where they could. The governor listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing them to speak without interruption. When they finished, he sat in thoughtful silence for several long moments. "This is a serious matter," he finally said. "Judge Voss has been a powerful figure in the territory for many years. These allegations, if proven true, represent a profound betrayal of public trust." "They are true, Governor," Winifred insisted. "Every word." Governor Thayer nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Voss. Your testimony is detailed and consistent, and Mr. Cooper's reputation lends it considerable weight." He turned to his secretary, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting. "Prepare the papers immediately. I want Judge Voss suspended from his duties pending a full investigation, effective immediately." Relief washed over Winifred at these words. It wasn't a complete victory yet, but it was a crucial first step. "What about Miss Voss's safety?" Isaiah asked, his concern evident. "Her father has already sent men after her once." "I'll arrange for territorial marshals to provide protection," the governor assured them. "Miss Voss, you're welcome to stay here in Cheyenne under our protection until the investigation is complete." "Thank you, Governor," Winifred replied gratefully, "but I believe I already have arrangements." She glanced at Isaiah, who met her gaze with quiet understanding. The governor noticed the exchange but made no comment. "Very well. I'll have my staff arrange accommodations for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll take your formal deposition for the official record. After that, you're free to go where you wish, though I may need to call on you again as the investigation progresses." As they left the governor's office, exhaustion finally caught up with Winifred. The emotional and physical strain of the past week had taken its toll, and she found herself leaning on Isaiah's strength as they made their way to the hotel, where rooms had been arranged for them. In the privacy of the hotel hallway outside her door, Isaiah finally gave voice to the question that had been building between them since their conversation in Laramie. "Did you mean what you said earlier?" he asked quietly. "About having arrangements after this is over?" Winifred looked up at him, taking in the bruise darkening beneath his eye, the split lip from his fight with Reeves, the weariness evident in his face, all sacrifices he had made for her. But more than that, she saw the warmth in his green eyes, the tenderness that had grown between them over their journey. "I meant it," she confirmed. "If your offer still stands." Isaiah's expression softened. "It does. The Double W has never had a proper mistress, not since my mother." "It's past time it did." The implication of his words made Winifred's heart race. "Isaiah, are you proposing?" He smiled slightly, despite his split lip. "Not yet, not properly." "You deserve better than a half-hearted proposal in a hotel hallway when we're both exhausted, and I look like I've been trampled by a bull." Winifred laughed softly. "I wouldn't mind, you know." "I would," Isaiah said firmly. "When I ask you to be my wife, Winifred Voss, it won't be after a fight on a train or a meeting with the governor. It will be somewhere beautiful and peaceful, somewhere worthy of you." "I'll hold you to that," Winifred replied, her voice warm with promise. Isaiah leaned down and very gently pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and restrained passion. "Good night, Winifred," he murmured against her lips. "Sleep well. Tomorrow begins the rest of your life." "Our life," she corrected softly. "Our life," he agreed, his smile reaching his eyes. "I like the sound of that." The formal deposition the next day was grueling but necessary. Winifred spent hours recounting every detail she could remember about her father's corruption, with territorial lawyers meticulously documenting her testimony. By the time it was complete, she felt drained but also relieved the truth was finally on record, beyond her father's ability to silence or distort. Governor Thayer met with them again afterward, informing them that Judge Voss had been officially suspended and an interim judge appointed to Jackson. Marshals had been dispatched to serve the papers and begin collecting evidence. "What will happen to him?" Winifred asked, surprised to find that, despite everything, a small part of her still cared what became of her father. "That depends on what the investigation uncovers," the governor replied honestly. "At minimum, he will lose his position and his reputation. If the corruption is as extensive as you've described, he may face criminal charges and imprisonment." It was a sobering thought, but Winifred felt no satisfaction in it, only a quiet sense that justice was finally being served, not just for her but for all those who had suffered under her father's corrupt rule. With their official duties complete, Isaiah, Winifred, and Samuel shared a final meal together in Cheyenne. The lawyer would be staying to assist with the investigation, while Isaiah and Winifred planned to return to the Double W the following day. "What will you do now, Miss Voss?" Samuel asked as they enjoyed their dinner. "Return to Jackson eventually." "No," Winifred replied definitively. "There's nothing for me there anymore. I think my future lies elsewhere." Her gaze met Isaiah's across the table, and the warmth she saw there confirmed her decision. Samuel noticed the exchange and smiled knowingly. "I see. Well, the Double W is a fine ranch, and I believe it will be in excellent hands." The journey back to the ranch was far more relaxed than their frantic flight to Laramie and Cheyenne had been. They traveled by train to Laramie, reclaimed their horses, and set out for the Double W at a leisurely pace, enjoying the opportunity to simply be together without the constant threat of pursuit. During an overnight camp in a beautiful meadow nestled among pine-covered hills, Isaiah fulfilled his promise. As the sun set in a spectacular display of gold and crimson, painting the Wyoming sky in breathtaking colors, he asked Winifred to be his wife. "I told you it would be somewhere beautiful and peaceful," he said, holding her hands in his as they stood together watching the sunset. "Somewhere worthy of you." "It's perfect," Winifred agreed, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "And yes, Isaiah Weston, I will marry you." Their kiss sealed the promise, a tender exchange that held the hope and possibilities of their future together. When they finally returned to the Double W, Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on the porch, her usually stern expression breaking into a rare smile when she saw them riding up together. "About time you two came home," she said by way of greeting. "I was beginning to worry." "No need for worry anymore," Isaiah assured her, helping Winifred down from her horse. "Everything's been settled and there's news to share." Mrs. Abernathy looked between them knowingly. "I think I can guess the news. Come inside. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread in the oven." As they settled into the comfortable routine of ranch life, Winifred found herself adapting more easily than she had expected. The skills her mother had taught her riding, shooting, managing a household served her well. And the new skills she learned helping with the cattle, understanding the business side of the ranch, gave her a sense of purpose and partnership with Isaiah that she had never experienced before. News from Cheyenne came regularly through Samuel's letters. The investigation into Judge Voss had uncovered even more corruption than Winifred had known about. Her father had been formally charged and was awaiting trial. Many of the farmers who had lost their land were being compensated, though the damage done to their lives could never be fully repaired. Isaiah and Winifred were married that autumn in a simple but joyful ceremony on the ranch. Samuel Cooper came from Cheyenne to officiate, and Isaiah's sister, Elizabeth, traveled from Denver with her husband. The ranch hands and neighboring families gathered to celebrate, and even a few brave souls from Jackson attended, including Sheriff Miller, who had finally found the courage to stand against Judge Voss once the governor's investigation began. As Winifred stood before Isaiah, exchanging vows beneath an arch of autumn leaves and wildflowers, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the horror of being auctioned in Jackson's town square to finding love and a new beginning with the very man who had bought her freedom, her life had taken a turn she could never have imagined. "I, Isaiah Weston, take you, Winifred Voss, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Isaiah's deep voice carried across the assembled guests, his green eyes never leaving hers. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Winifred repeated the sacred words, she felt the last shadows of her past lifting, replaced by the bright promise of her future with Isaiah. The years that followed were good ones for the Double W and its new mistress. Winifred brought the same determination and courage that had led her to stand against her father to her role as Isaiah's wife and partner. Together, they expanded the ranch, improved their breeding stock, and became known throughout the territory for their fair dealings and hospitality. News eventually came that Judge Hammond Voss had been convicted of multiple counts of corruption and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Winifred received the news with a complex mixture of emotion, satisfaction that justice had been served, sadness for what might have been if her father had been a different sort of man, and finally, a sense of closure. "Are you all right?" Isaiah asked when he found her sitting alone on the porch after Samuel's letter had arrived with the news. "Yes," Winifred replied honestly. "It's strange, I thought I would feel more. Something. Vindication, perhaps, or anger, but mostly I just feel that a chapter has finally closed." Isaiah sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "And a new one continues," he said, glancing meaningfully at the slight swell of her belly where their first child was growing. Winifred smiled, placing her free hand over his. "A much better chapter." In the spring of the following year, their son was born, a healthy, strong boy they named James, after Isaiah's father. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine, named for both their mothers. As their family grew, so did the Double W, becoming one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming territory. On the 5th anniversary of the day Isaiah had bought Winifred's freedom at the auction block, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. "You ever think about that day?" Winifred asked, her head resting comfortably on Isaiah's shoulder. "The day we met, often," Isaiah admitted, his arm tightening around her. "It was the best $200 I ever spent." Winifred laughed softly. "I was so afraid when you first bid on me. I had no idea who you were or what you wanted." "And now?" Isaiah asked, looking down at her with the same intense green eyes that had captured her attention that fateful day. "Now I know exactly who you are," Winifred replied, lifting her face to his. "The man who asked what I had to say when everyone else wanted me silent. The man who believed in me when I most needed it. The man I love more with each passing day." Isaiah's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of everything they had built together. "And you," he murmured against her lips, "are the woman who had the courage to speak the truth, no matter the cost. The woman who transformed my life with her strength and her heart. The woman I will love until my dying breath." As twilight deepened into night, with their children now tucked safely in bed, Winifred and Isaiah remained on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. The same stars her mother had said were brighter here, closer somehow. The stars Isaiah's mother had called heaven's window. Looking up at those stars, with the solid warmth of her husband beside her and the knowledge of their sleeping children inside, Winifred felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path that had led her here had been neither straight nor simple, just as Mrs. Abernathy had once said. But it had brought her exactly where she was meant to be, home, with the family she and Isaiah had created together, in this wild and beautiful land they both loved. And for that, she would be forever thankful.